Hey everybody, what's going on? Today I want to go through every single major waterfall in the Wentworth and Folly mountain area, and I'm going to be rating them on 3 different categories. That's going to be number 1, accessibility, because I mean a waterfall is no good if you can't get to it. Number 2, it's going to be rated on its amount of water flow. Some of them dry up and some of them are just kind of seasonal. Number 3, it's going to be its overall aesthetic appeal. All right, let's get right into it. I'm going to start off with my least favorite, the bottom of this list, and I'm going to work my way up. Okay, so the first one on the list, I'm just going to call it the Wentworth Valley Falls. It's kind of hard to explain where it is, but here it is. And it's kind of a long, high hike to get to it. You got to hike all the way from the highway up to the tracks, and if it's a seasonal fall, so if it's not wet season, there's barely any water flow, and even when it's wet season, there's not a whole lot. If you're already up there anyway to see something else, then it's worth kind of taking a peek, but other than that, I wouldn't recommend it. So on a scale of 1 to 5 for accessibility, I'm going to give it a 2. On a scale of 1 to 5 for water flow, I'm going to give it a 1. Yeah, there's no water flow and it's seasonal, so. And on a scale of 1 to 5 for aesthetic appeal, I'm going to give it a 2.5. If the water's flowing, there are some nice big boulders up there, so it's not bad to get a few pictures. You know, if you get good lighting, you might be able to capture some nice images, but overall, it's my least favorite in the area. Moving along, we're going to head over to Meadows Falls. It is the one, if you're at Folly Lake down by the Lafarge gravel pit, you can walk under the bridge over the railroad tracks, and just on the left you have Meadows Falls is what it's called to my knowledge. It's just a little stream that trickles down the side of the mountain there. It's kind of like a staircase of cascading falls, and it's not bad. Accessibility wise, I would give it a 2.5 out of 5. Some of the walk is nice, but you're mostly going right directly up the river, so if you don't have rubber boots or something like that, it's probably not that good, and the reward at the end is just kind of mediocre, to be honest with you. If you're in the area exploring falls and you're used to it, it's definitely worth to check out maybe the bottom, but I wouldn't bother hiking to the top of it. So for water flow, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. It's not a massively flowing brook, but it does always seem to have a little bit of current going on there. Aesthetic appeal, I would give it about maybe a 3 out of 5. You know, there's a couple drops in it. It's not bad looking, and I mean, you could probably get some nice photos out of that place. It wouldn't be the first one I'd go to, but again, if you're kind of spending the day in Wentworth, it's definitely worthwhile to take a quick look. Okay, the next one I'm going to say, now there's going to be a toss-up between the next 2 because of different reasons. This is going to be between the Harty Brook Falls and the Brook Falls. So I'm going to start with the Harty Brook Falls. It's just a little ways down from the Meadow, between that and where the Wentworth Falls are. On the left, I'm going to have all these on a map so you can see the general locations. Some of them are on private property, so I'm not going to give you the absolute directions to them, but they're available on Google Maps, so they don't really need that much instruction to get to them. First off, the Harty Brook Falls, just a little bit of a trail off from the highway. It's pretty accessible. It's an easy to follow trail. You can eventually hear the water if it's flowing well. You'll very quickly come to the biggest drop in the falls, and again, this is one that kind of staircase cascades its way up the side of a mountain until you get to the train tracks. And what kind of makes this stand out from the other ones in the aesthetic appeal category is there's a nice big cave at the top. I'm going to go ahead and give this one about a 4 out of 5 for aesthetic appeal. Accessibility, I'll give it a 4 out of 5 because there's a path to it. It is pretty close to the road. Water flow, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 because there's not always a whole lot of water flowing and it almost dries up. It's still absolutely worth going to. Throw that in with the mix when you're headed into Wentworth Valley. The tie I had is the Brook Falls. Now, the Brook Falls is on private property and the property owner does not like people visiting it. The caveat there is it really is on the side of the train tracks. So if you respectfully wanted to get a few pictures of it on CN's property, that's up to you. I am not encouraging you to do that. but it is also available on Google Maps, so it's pretty easy to figure out where it is. You can follow the train tracks from the Wentworth Falls, make your way there. Again, the owner doesn't want people trespassing. They've had issues, so don't visit unless you have permission from the owner, or you're just kind of gazing down from the train tracks or using a telephoto lens, something like that. For that reason, accessibility has a 1 out of 5. I'm not going to go below 1. Aesthetic appeal, it's going to have a 5. It's actually a really nice looking waterfall. It kind of has that bow tie shape. And it has a pretty good drop to it, a nice pull at the bottom. As far as flow is concerned, also gets a 5 out of 5. I've been there twice and it has been roaring each time. Next one on my list, we're going to go back up to Folly Mountain, and we're going to talk about the Grandfather Clock Falls. The easiest way to gain access to it that I know of, there's probably more direct ways, but the easiest way I know of is to park along where the train tracks go under the highway, and you can follow them along until you kind of come to a little metal box thing, and the Grandfather Clock Falls are right there. They're pretty easy to find, to navigate to, but the hike down to them is pretty difficult. A lot of the ground gives away. There's like the rocks that the CN puts down there that are on the side of the train tracks. Those are all, they kind of give way. And if you actually want to get down to the base of the Grandfather Clock Falls, it's pretty steep. It's not super dangerous, but you could get hurt. There's a couple cliffs that could be deadly if you try to get too close to them, but you can find a less deadly way to get down to them. It's just kind of steep, and I was very winded climbing out. For that reason, accessibility is going to be 1 out of 5. Aesthetic appeal, they are beautiful, they're roaring, they're big, they're powerful, 5 out of 5. For water flow, again, 5 out of 5. They're always roaring and they're always a nice sight to see. Moving along, and it's going to be the same result basically as the Grandfather Clock Falls. The Folly River Falls downstream from the Grandfather Clock Falls is just a little after the bend on the train tracks when you're following the same path that you are going to be visiting the Grandfather Clock Falls along. There's not as many huge cliffs along there, but it's just as steep and it's just as slippery. And for that, I'm going to give it also a little bit more accessible, but a 2 out of 5 on that, because you got to have pretty good cardio and you could slip. It's just not quite as dangerous and it's not quite as far to walk. As far as water flow is concerned, it gets a 5 out of 5. It's on the same spot in the river as the Grandfather Clock. And as aesthetic appeal is concerned, I give it about a 4 out of 5. It's not quite as nice as the Grandfather Clock, and that's my opinion for aesthetic appeal. However, and what would kind of make it a 5 out of 5, which I don't know if it should really count because it's another waterfall that's right there, and it also depends on the season and the type of water flowing, rainfall. There's a huge waterfall that trickles down the side of the mountain right there, kind of like along the edge of a canyon or whatever you want to call it, and it makes the whole area really nice. There's a nice big pool, so depending on the day, it's either a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5. Moving along, and this time upstream from the Grandfather Clock Falls, is the Folly River Gorge. The Folly River Gorge is more accessible than the previous two. You make your way to Folly Lake, and then I think it's Stevens Road or something like that. It will be on the map. There's a logging road that you follow. It's a little rough. You can take it slow and probably make it in almost anything with a little bit of clearance. I made it no problem. 2 different SUVs. There's a spot by a culvert you pull over and you follow a little stream down and you're at the Folly River Gorge. The caveat is, if you actually want to visit the whole waterfall, like each set in the series along the gorge, you do have to do some kind of mountain goating and making your way up along. It doesn't have a path. It doesn't really have anywhere nice to kind of get a good footing. So to get down to the falls, it's not too hard. But to navigate along them all, it gets kind of tricky and it could be dangerous in a few spots. So accessibility, I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5. Aesthetic appeal, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. There's no real big massive falls. It's a unique area in that it's a gorge and it does offer some really high cliffs on the side, and it's a really cool place. Water flow, it always has tons of water no matter the year. It drains out of Folly Lake and you never have to worry about the water flow there. You can hear the waterfall as you approach it. So 5 out of 5 there on water flow. Definitely put that on your list if you're the adventurous type that doesn't mind a little bit more of a challenging waterfall. The next one is another mixed bag waterfall, and this is the upper Hart Lake Brook Falls. This waterfall, you have to drive to Hart Lake, and it's accessible from the edge of one of the lanes that go into the Hart Lake Falls. You just kind of have to know where to hike into the woods. It's not very far. It's a little bit steep. It's not dangerous, but you could lose your footing and slip, maybe get a couple bumps and bruises, but you'd be okay. Maybe a little winded. And so accessibility, I'd give it about a 3 out of 5. It's pretty quick hike, but it's just a little bit steep and there's no path, so you're kind of pushing through some brush. As far as aesthetic appeal is concerned, if there's good water flowing on it, I would give it a 5 out of 5 because it's massive. If you get there when there's no water flowing, then it's obviously not a 5 out of 5. And that being said, for the water flow, it's a seasonal one, so I'm going to split it right down the middle and give that a 2.5 out of 5. Depending on when you go, it sucks or it's really good. Moving along, I'm going to head down further to the lower Hart Lake Brook Falls and the Pasture Brook Falls, which I'm going to group together because many people visit them both at the same time. They're on the same path, and I'm going to let you know that this is actually probably my favorite set of waterfalls in the valley. It's the nicest hike. It's not very difficult. It's not super easy because there's a couple inclines to it. So if you're not in the greatest of shape, that's the only reason that it's not going to get a 5 out of 5 on accessibility. Once you're passing Folly Lake, as you're headed down into the valley, the second road on the right, you'll see the gated one that I believe goes up to like a grow up or something like that. The next right, you can either park your car there, or if the water's low, you can drive in and park in what I believe is to be an old shooting range, but I'm not sure. And a big positive to this one, along with it being on a four-wheeler path, is it's crown land. So you're not going to be worried about somebody's private property and getting in an argument with a property owner, or worry about infringing on somebody's personal space. So once you park there, you hike in for about 10 minutes or less, and you'll come up on the Hart Brook Falls. You'll hear them. Once you get to the first brook, you'll see a little footbridge. Before you cross the footbridge, you can just turn up on the right and you'll find a worn footpath that's pretty easy to navigate. If you want to get really close, it gets a little bit tricky, but for the Hart Lake Brook Falls 2, the lower one, accessibility, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It's pretty easy to get to. The only reason is I get 5 out of 5 because if you want to get really close for a nice picture, you gotta do a little bit of climbing. It's not that difficult. I did it holding my gimbal and camera, and I was never worried about dropping or breaking it, but it might not be for all ages. Continuing along the four-wheeler path, once you cross the footbridge, you eventually, after about 15 minutes, make your way to a huge series of cascading falls down the side of the Pasture Brook. And this is a beautiful hike all times of year and really nice in the fall. It's very popular for good reason. It has a nice wide path. It's just a pleasant walk. It's kind of steep, and for that reason, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 on accessibility because you might get a little bit winded going to it. It's not a very dangerous hike unless you want to get really close to some of the falls, but you really don't have to get a couple good pictures. Once you reach the Pasture Brook Falls, coming from Hart Lake Brook Falls, if you cross over another footbridge at the top, you can eventually make your way down to the bottom reaches of the falls. You'll have to look for some flagging tape and follow it along. You could also reach the Pasture Brook Falls from a neat little entry point on, I think it's Village Road or something like that. Again, all this is going to be on the map. I'm not sure who owns a property from that end, but there is a suspension bridge that's really neat. And I've seen people cross-country skiing and mountain biking there. So if it isn't crown land, I don't think people mind, but keep in mind we should always be respectful, and just in case it is private property, leave no trace, and don't block anybody's private drive with your car. Aesthetic appeal on Pasture Brook and Hart Lake, I'm going to give Pasture Brook by itself a 5 out of 5. It's just so unique, carving its way down the side of the hill with so many different styles of waterfalls in it. It definitely deserves a 5 out of 5. Water flow, every time I've been there, there's been pretty good flow. I can imagine it might slow down a little bit in the really dry seasons, but it's always been beautiful every time I've been there. So 5 out of 5 on water flow, 5 out of 5 on aesthetic appeal, and 4 out of 5 for accessibility. Hart Lake Brook Falls, I'm going to give that about a 4 out of 5. It's not the best falls, but it's still pretty big. I mean, 4 to 5 might be generous, but the same as water flow. It can get a little bit low, but there's always some water going on it. So I'm going to say about a 4 to 5 for water flow on the Hart Lake Brook Falls. Last falls and not least, and this is the obvious one, it's the Wentworth Falls. It's obviously the most accessible. There's actually, has its own civic number. I took my grandmother who's in her 80s there, and she made it in. It's flat. My 4-year-old son was there. It's very accessible. Obvious 5 out of 5 for accessibility. Water flow, it can dry up pretty bad at the Wentworth Falls. It can get down pretty low, but it doesn't get completely dry. So you're looking at probably a 3.5 out of 5 for water flow. Aesthetic appeal, it's gorgeous. It's really tall, has a cave with water coming out of the top of it, and it forms some unique pathways down to the bottom. It gets an easy 5 out of 5. For the reason of being so accessible, I'm going to say it's probably the best one in the falls. It's not my personal favorite, but it's the one I most recommend because it's easy to cut your teeth on this waterfall if you're new to waterfall hunting. Anyway, guys, that's it. That's all the major falls I can think of in the Wentworth Valley. Hopefully this inspires you to get out and explore the Wentworth Valley. And if you want to find me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/New Scotland. I hope to see you guys in the next one.